It was a Tuesday morning in October 1992, and the hallways of Sigma Sound Studios in New York smelled like stale coffee and cigarette smoke. Bonnie Tyler had been in the music business long enough to know when something felt off. She just couldn't quite put her finger on it yet. Her manager had told her it was a private session, just her and the producers. Come in, lay down a vocal, see how it fits. Simple enough. Bonnie had done 1,000 sessions like this, maybe more. She wasn't nervous. Nervous was for people who still had something to prove. She was 50 years old that year, and her voice had lived a whole life by then. It had survived nodules, surgery, years of cigarettes, years of heartbreak. What came out of her throat wasn't perfect. It was better than perfect. It was real. She pushed open the studio door with her coffee in one hand and her coat half off her shoulder, and that's when she saw her. Whitney Houston was sitting in the corner of the room on a leather couch, legs crossed, looking at her nails like she was bored. She looked up when Bonnie walked in and gave her one of those polite smiles that famous people give each other when they're not sure what else to do. Bonnie stopped, looked at her manager, looked at the producers behind the glass. Nobody said anything for a second that felt like a full minute. "What is this?" Bonnie said. Not angry, just asking. Clive Davis stepped out from behind the glass partition. He had that look on his face, the one that told you he'd already made a decision and was just waiting for everyone else to catch up. "Ladies," he said, as if this were the most normal thing in the world, "thank you both for coming. If you want more stories like this one, go ahead and subscribe. We tell the ones that didn't make it into the documentaries." The song was called "Where Do Broken Hearts Go?" Not the Whitney Houston version you already know. This was before any of that, a ballad so open and aching that the first time the studio musicians played it back, one of the engineers had quietly excused herself to cry in the bathroom. Clive had a problem. He loved the song. He believed in it completely, but he couldn't decide whose voice it belonged to. Bonnie's manager had pitched it first. Her raspy, weathered timbre would tear the song apart in the best possible way, like rough hands on something delicate. A song about broken hearts needed a voice that sounded like it had actually been broken. Bonnie's voice had scars on it. You could hear them from the first note. But then someone had played the demo for Whitney. She'd been sitting in the back of a town car, half paying attention, and she'd started singing along softly under her breath. The driver turned around at a red light and just looked at her. Not because she was Whitney Houston, because of what had just come out of her mouth. Word had gotten back to Clive by that evening, so now here they were. Two women in the same room with the same song between them, and only one of them was going to walk out of there with it. Bonnie set her coffee down on the producer's console and sat across from Whitney. Up close, Whitney was even more striking in that way that didn't seem entirely fair. "I didn't know you'd be here," Whitney said. "Neither did I," Bonnie replied. They both looked at Clive. He spread his hands in that gesture that said, "What can I tell you?" and sat down. Here's what people forget about Bonnie Tyler. In 1978, surgery on her vocal cords changed everything. The voice that came back wasn't the one that had gone under the knife. Rougher, smokier, more raw in a way that couldn't be taught or faked. Some people said her career was finished. Then she recorded "It's a Heartache" and sold 6 million copies. She knew what it felt like to step into a vocal booth with everything on the line and come out the other side still standing. She wasn't intimidated by Whitney Houston. At least that's what she told herself that morning. The session was structured simply. Each of them would sing the song once through. Clive and the producers would listen, then they'd decide. No pressure, Clive had said. In that way, people say no pressure when they mean the exact opposite. Bonnie went first. She'd rather sing cold and get it done than sit there watching Whitney warm up and work herself into a spiral. She stepped into the booth, settled the headphones over her ears, and waited. The studio was quiet in that way. Only recording studios are quiet. Thick padded silence that feels like it's absorbing every sound before it can think about existing. The piano started, then the strings, soft and aching, and Bonnie Tyler started to sing. What she did with that song wasn't pretty. It wasn't meant to be. She pulled the melody through something raw and lived in and slightly broken. Her voice cracked in two places, not because she couldn't hit the note, but because that crack was the truth of the moment, and she knew it, and she leaned into it. She sang it like someone who had already been through everything the song was describing and come out the other side with a few scars and her sense of humor mostly intact. When she finished, the studio held its silence for a long second. Then somebody behind the glass started clapping. Bonnie walked back out without looking at Whitney. She sat down on the leather couch and picked up her coffee, which had gone cold, and drank it anyway. Whitney hadn't moved during Bonnie's performance. She'd sat with her hands in her lap and her eyes half closed, listening to every note. She knew what she'd just heard. Bonnie Tyler had sung the truth of that song so completely that there wasn't much oxygen left in the room for anyone else. And yet, Whitney stood up, straightened her jacket, walked to the door of the vocal booth, and paused with her hand on the frame. She turned back and looked at Clive, who gave her a small nod that told her nothing. She stepped inside. The thing about Whitney in 1992 is that the pressure was becoming almost architectural by then. It had weight and structure. It pushed down from above and in from every side. The Bodyguard soundtrack was still being finished. The world was waiting for something enormous from her, something that justified every magazine cover and every headline and every expectation piling up since she was a teenager, singing in her mother's church in Newark. People talked about her voice like it was a natural phenomenon, a thunderstorm, something you didn't argue with. But she was 28 years old and she was tired in a way that didn't have a good word for it yet. She settled the headphones over her ears, closed her eyes. The piano started. There is a moment in certain vocal performances when the room changes. Something shifts in the air. The people listening stop thinking about anything else. Their bodies go still. Their minds go quiet. The only thing left is the sound and what it's doing to them. That moment happened about 45 seconds into Whitney's run-through. She had started carefully, feeling her way into the melody. Her voice was warm and controlled and beautiful. But it was still the voice doing what the voice was supposed to do, hitting the marks, landing the notes. Then something opened up. It happened on a phrase in the second verse, a line about not knowing where to turn, and Whitney's voice went somewhere underneath the melody, somewhere darker and more personal, and pulled the whole song with it into that place. The producers stopped talking mid-sentence. One put down his pen. Another leaned forward without realizing it. Clive Davis said nothing. He just watched. Bonnie Tyler, on the couch with her cold coffee, opened her eyes. By the final chorus, Whitney wasn't singing the song so much as living inside it. Her voice was climbing, then soaring, then doing something that doesn't have a proper technical term, something between a note and an emotion, a place where control and surrender meet and briefly become the same thing. The musicians who had played this song 100 times were looking at each other with expressions that said, "Are you hearing what I'm hearing?" She held the last note a moment longer than necessary, just slightly, just enough. Then silence, the same thick, padded quiet as before, but different, heavier, like the room needed a second to recover. Bonnie was still on the couch when Whitney came back out. She looked at her. That polite smile from earlier was completely gone. What was there instead was something more honest. "How old are you?" Bonnie said. Whitney almost laughed. 28. Bonnie shook her head slowly. "Lord help the rest of us," she said, not bitterly, almost fondly. Whitney sat down next to her, both of them looking at the same wall now, at the platinum records in their frames. "You were incredible in there," Whitney said. Bonnie gave a short, dry laugh. "Doesn't matter. You know it doesn't matter. That's not what I've been in this business since before you were in high school, honey. I know what just happened in that room." She glanced over. "So do you." Whitney didn't say anything. "You want to know what your problem is?" Bonnie said. "Not particularly." Whitney was smiling a little. "You sing like you're still trying to prove something. You sing at people. And it works because what you've got, you could aim at a brick wall and the wall would fall down." She turned the coffee cup in her hands. "But you're still aiming. The ones who really last stop aiming eventually. They open up and let the thing come through them instead of pushing it out. Whitney was quiet for a moment. And you think you do that? I've been doing it since 1978, Bonnie said. Didn't have much choice. The voice I had before surgery was something I controlled. The voice I woke up with after was something I had to surrender to. That's a very different relationship with your own instrument. Clive came out a few minutes later and said he'd be in touch. Nobody expected a decision that afternoon. But what stayed with the people who had been in that room wasn't the outcome. It was the 45 minutes before it, two women, two different kinds of voice, two completely different relationships with the same impossible thing music asks of you. One voice that had been broken and rebuilt and carried its damage like a trophy. One voice that was still learning what it meant to let go. Whitney went back and finished I Will Always Love You and released it that November. 14 weeks at #1. The best-selling physical single by a female artist of all time. The voice that had made a producer put down his pen and lean forward without thinking went on to define a decade. Bonnie Tyler watched it happen from a distance, with recognition, with something close to rueful pride. She had known, sitting on that couch with her cold coffee, what she was in the presence of. She was asked about Whitney in interviews over the years, and always spoke carefully, the way people do about things that actually matter to them. She said once that what she remembered most wasn't the singing, it was the look on Whitney's face afterward, when she thought no one was watching. Not triumphant, not relieved, just tired, and young, and carrying something that looked heavier than it should have been at 28. I wanted to tell her to put it down, Bonnie said. Whatever it was. I wanted to tell her it was okay to just set it down for a while and breathe. She paused. I don't know if she ever did. Have you ever walked into a room feeling like you had everything to prove, only to watch someone else prove it better than you imagined? Or have you ever been the one who surprised the whole room, including yourself? Tell us what that moment felt like in the comments below.